Hi, Michelle from At Home Property here, just continuing the conversation around cost versus value of a service. One of the areas that I touched on in my last video was in respect to managing vacancy. So managing vacancy is where we're either renting a property for the first time for a new client and we're offering advice around that strategy, or it's potentially a current tenancy where we're moving on a tenant, or the tenant's vacating and we're replacing that tenancy. So on both sides, there's an opportunity for us to obviously add value to our clients and ensuring that that gap in between all the time vacant is minimal. And when I say minimal, we aim for between 1 week and 2 weeks vacancy maximum. That is our aim with renting a property. So that could be a question you ask a property manager: is what is your average turnaround or days on market, days vacant for your portfolio? So how is it that we, I guess, outperform our competitors? And we do, and we have the evidence for that, is that firstly, we understand the market. We know the comparables and we do our research. So when we are setting the rent on your property, it's not something that we give you off the top of our head. We're giving you figures based on, firstly, what the supply and demand is like, the vacancy at the current time. Then we're looking at the most direct comparables on market. That's probably not what we rely on the most, because those properties at the end of the day are still vacant and not rented. And the other and most important is what those comparables are and what's rented most recently within the last 6 months in our market is what we're generally looking at. Sometimes if the market hasn't shifted a lot in that time, we might look at the last 12 months of what's been achieved for comparable properties. And when I say comparable properties, they may not directly compare with your property and the features and benefits that your property has, but we're working with averages to start. We start with that, we build on that from there. So if you do have standout features of your investment property, they will not be ignored. We will be adding that value and adding to the potential rent return by looking at those benefits that tenants might see in your property. So it is a very strategic part of what we do, is understanding our local market and setting the rent as close to achieving the highest possible rent as we can, obviously, for your investment. You'll find that there shouldn't be a big gap when you're receiving a rental appraisal. So really, if someone is quoting you a rent, it should be no more than $20 or $30 from what they quote at the top end and what they quote at the bottom end, if they really understand the market. So with us, we tend to give 3 price points. This is our hope to get the absolute top. There might be a few properties that achieve this and maybe had 1 application, but there was not a huge amount of interest at that level. The likely rent, where we see the most likely achievable rent is, and the worst case scenario. So if you are a new investor and you are relying on that potentially, if you're purchasing a property and you've asked us to provide an appraisal for you, we will give you the worst case scenario as well. So we will do our research and ensure that you understand that. So setting the rent is one of the most important strategies, and then the second is timing, and we'll talk about that in the next episode.